In the fall of 2022, the peaceful college town of Moscow, Idaho, became the center of national attention. Known for its quiet streets and close-knit community, no one could have imagined what would unfold in mid-November. 4 university students full of dreams and potential were tragically found dead in their off-campus home. The names Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin would soon be shared across news outlets and social media platforms as the country tried to make sense of the heartbreaking event. The incident happened in the early hours of a Sunday morning. Despite multiple people being in the house at the time, only 2 individuals survived unharmed. The survivors, Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen, were deeply affected by what they had witnessed and later became key to helping investigators understand what took place. The University of Idaho, where the victims were enrolled, suspended classes in shock and grief. Candlelight vigils were held throughout the state as thousands mourned the loss of the 4 young lives. Families, friends, and strangers alike came together, united by sadness and the desire for justice. Law enforcement launched a major investigation, but early on, details were limited. The lack of immediate suspects led to widespread speculation online. Many students returned home early for Thanksgiving break, and fear spread across campus. Questions mounted: who could have done this and why? In those first few days, authorities remained cautious with their words. They reassured the public that the attack appeared to be targeted, but provided little additional information. Rumors circulated and theories grew rapidly, but the real answers remained hidden. It was not until weeks later that the name Bryan Kohberger entered the picture. A criminology PhD student studying at a nearby university, his arrest came as a complete surprise. Many struggled to understand how someone so academically involved in studying crime could be connected to such a devastating event. As the community continued to process the tragedy, one thing became clear. This case was unlike anything the town had ever experienced. And although justice would slowly take its course, the memory of that quiet town shaken by violence would never be forgotten. As news of the tragedy spread, law enforcement agencies from across the state joined forces to investigate. The Moscow Police Department, supported by the Idaho State Police and the FBI, began a careful search for clues. The case quickly became one of the most closely watched in the country, and pressure mounted on the authorities to find answers. Investigators spent countless hours at the scene, examining every room and collecting physical evidence. They reviewed security footage from nearby buildings, interviewed potential witnesses, and studied digital records for any sign of unusual behavior. The home where the incident occurred became a symbol of unanswered questions, with yellow tape marking its perimeter and officers stationed nearby around the clock. Meanwhile, the public followed every update closely. Online forums, social media platforms, and podcasts were filled with speculation and theories. Some tried to reconstruct timelines, while others examined the victim's social media for any possible connections. But despite the intense interest, investigators kept most of their findings private to avoid compromising the case. A key piece of evidence emerged from a nearby surveillance camera that captured a white sedan passing by the neighborhood around the time of the incident. This vehicle, later identified as a Hyundai Elantra, became a central focus. Authorities asked the public for help identifying the car and its owner, and tips began pouring in from all over the country. At the same time, forensic experts were analyzing DNA collected from the scene. While progress was steady, the officials remained tight-lipped. They wanted to ensure that when an arrest was made, the case would be built on solid, reliable evidence. Weeks passed with no arrests and frustration began to grow. Families of the victims pleaded for patience, trusting that justice would come in time. Behind the scenes, investigators continued to work around the clock. Then in late December, a breakthrough came. A suspect had been identified and authorities quietly made plans to move forward. What had once seemed like a mystery with no clear answers was now entering a new phase, one where the face behind the crime would be revealed. The calm winter landscape of Idaho was about to witness a major turning point, as law enforcement prepared to take the next step in their search for justice. In the early morning hours of late December, a quiet neighborhood in eastern Pennsylvania was suddenly filled with flashing lights and law enforcement vehicles. After weeks of careful investigation, authorities had made their move. A man named Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. For many, the name meant nothing at first, but for investigators, It was the moment they had been working toward since mid-November. Bryan Kohberger was a doctoral student in criminology at Washington State University, located just across the border from Moscow, Idaho. His academic focus on criminal behavior and justice studies had once seemed purely academic, but now his name was tied to one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent memory. What shocked the public even more was the nature of his background. Kohberger had studied the psychology of criminals. He had even conducted surveys asking people how they chose their victims and how they felt after committing crimes. Part of what he claimed was research. These details emerged shortly after his arrest, sparking deep discussion and concern. Authorities had linked him to the case using a combination of digital evidence, phone records, and DNA. A key clue came from a knife sheath found at the scene, which contained a single male DNA sample. That sample, after weeks of analysis and comparison to genealogical databases, eventually led them to Kohberger. Law enforcement also tracked cell phone data that showed movements matching the location and timing of the incident. His white Hyundai Elantra, spotted on surveillance video, was another critical link that confirmed suspicions. Following his arrest, Kohberger was extradited to Idaho to face charges. The courtroom was filled with reporters, family members of the victims, and people hoping to understand what had happened. As he entered his plea of not guilty, emotions ran high. For many, it was the first time they had seen the person accused of taking so much from so many. Despite the mountain of evidence, the case was still far from over. Investigators continued to build a complete timeline, while both the prosecution and defense prepared for a lengthy legal battle. Kohberger's background, behavior, and every detail of his life came under public and legal scrutiny. While some found relief in the arrest, others felt that justice had only just begun. The pain remained, and the questions had not all been answered. But for the first time, there was a name, a face, and a path forward. Nearly 3 years after the tragedy that shocked a nation, Bryan Kohberger stood once again in front of a judge. This time, the courtroom was quieter, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. In a move that brought the long legal process closer to its end, Kohberger entered a plea of guilty to all 4 counts of murder. The announcement came as part of an agreement that would remove the possibility of the death penalty. The courtroom listened closely as the details of the plea deal were read aloud. As part of the agreement, Kohberger waived his right to appeal and accepted that he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. He did not show emotion as the names of the victims, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were once again spoken into the record. For the families of the victims, the moment brought mixed emotions. Some felt a sense of closure knowing that the long trial had been avoided and that the person responsible had admitted guilt. Others felt the loss just as deeply as they had the day it happened. Justice, while served, could never bring back what was taken. Outside the courthouse, supporters and members of the community gathered quietly. They lit candles and held signs honoring the lives lost. Although the legal chapter of the story had reached its conclusion, the emotional journey continued for everyone touched by the case. The university, which had since made efforts to improve student safety and mental health support, held a memorial service to reflect on the lives of the 4 students. Professors, classmates, and friends spoke about the dreams and bright futures of Kaylee, Madison, Zana, and Ethan. As for Bryan Kohberger, his story now serves as a reminder of how even those who study criminal behavior are not immune to falling into darkness. Many still question what truly motivated his actions, and some answers may never come. But what remains is a collective vow to remember the victims not for how they were taken, but for how they lived. In the end, the story of the Idaho students is one of heartbreak, resilience, and a community's determination to seek truth and healing. Though the case is closed, the memory of those lost continues to live on, in the hearts of those who knew them, and in the stories now told to ensure they are never forgotten.